Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
Yay!
So today we have a really fascinating deep dive for you. We're going to explore just how incredibly fragile our human systems really are.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we're talking about everything from the developing minds of our children to the literal pipelines that power our stoves, and even the invisible public trust that holds our highest courts together.
It is a lot of ground to cover.
It is. We are diving sequentially into 6 critical articles from today's newspaper, spanning the editorial, opinion, science, and text and context sections. Our mission today is just to extract the vital insights you need to really understand the world right now. So let's jump right in. Let's start with that idea of trust, specifically looking at this fascinating editorial on the Supreme Court.
Right, yeah. And it's a perfect place to start, honestly, because the foundation of our entire legal system is, well, it's currently at the center of this big debate regarding an NSERT Class 8 textbook.
Oh, wow. A Class 8 textbook.
Yeah. The Supreme Court recently reacted quite strongly to how the judiciary was depicted in this specific book. And the result of that, the book was literally shelved, authors were questioned, and now a new committee is deciding what children should actually be taught about the courts.
You know, it's funny because we normally treat the Supreme Court as this sort of untouchable fortress, right?
Right.
But this whole controversy over contempt of court, it points to this slightly terrifying reality. Like, judges don't actually have the power of the purse, and they don't have the power of the sword.
Exactly.
The legislature controls the money, the executive controls the police and the military, so their entire authority relies purely on this shared illusion, right? Just public trust.
Yeah, that is the unspoken premise of the entire balance of power. The real substratum of a judge's power is the faith that you, the public, vest in them. And that actually brings us to the 2 types of contempt that the article breaks down.
Okay, lay them out for me.
So civil contempt is pretty straightforward. If a court issues an order and someone just straight up disobeys it, well, that's civil contempt.
Right, makes sense.
But criminal contempt is where we enter, diagnostic muddy waters. It's invoked for obstructing justice, sure, but also for scandalizing the court through hostile, motivated criticism that basically shakes public confidence.
Wait, so it isn't just about a judge getting their feelings hurt or, their ego bruised?
No, far from it. In fact, historically, the greatest legal minds have warned against using contempt just to protect personal pride. Chief Justice P.B. Gajendra Gadkar famously noted that frequent or indiscriminate use of contempt in anger, it actually damages a court's dignity rather than sustaining it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and we've seen this broad shoulders approach in action. Chief Justice S.P. Parucha once dropped action against activists Mehta Patkar and Arundhati Roy, stating explicitly that the court's shoulders are broad enough to just shrug off their comments.
I love that. My absolute favorite example of those broad shoulders is the 1987 spy catcher case in the UK.
Oh, right, the Daily Mail one.
Yes. The Daily Mail literally printed a front-page headline calling the judges old fools.
Which is pretty bold.
Super bold. And Lord Templeman, rather than throwing the editors in jail, he just brushed it off. He basically noted that his age was a factual reality, and being a fool was just an opinion, so he just couldn't be bothered.
That is amazing.
But it makes me wonder, if courts can brush off being called old fools, where exactly do they draw the line on criticism?
Well, the line gets crossed when the criticism is reckless, demonstrably false, and systematically designed to denigrate the institution itself. And here is why this matters to you as a listener, that reservoir of public trust is the birthing ground for judicial review.
Right.
Judicial review is the only mechanism that holds politicians and bureaucrats accountable. It's what protects fundamental rights. So when we talk about what goes into a Class 8 textbook, it has to accurately reflect this stellar protective role.
But they can't just whitewash everything, right?
Exactly. The editorial makes a crucial counterpoint here. Textbooks shouldn't be pure propaganda either. They have to acknowledge factual challenges like massive infrastructure deficits or the rare but incredibly damaging issue of judicial corruption. It's all about preserving that connective tissue of trust through honesty.
Speaking of institutions trying to maintain control and trust when the ground shifts beneath them, the geopolitical map of West Asia is practically unrecognizable right now compared to just a month ago.
Oh, it's wild.
Yeah. Our second editorial covers a massive security realignment over there.
We are truly witnessing a profound generational shift. The U.S. and Israel-led conflict against Iran has entered its 2nd month now.
Right.
And we are seeing major global disruptions, most notably the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. In response to all this, Iran has adopted this scorched earth policy, actively striking targets across the Persian Gulf that are tied to American interests.
And what's wild to me is how the regional players are scrambling to adapt. Take Pakistan, for example.
Yeah, that was unexpected.
Completely.
Yeah.
They are suddenly attempting to step in and mediate. It really looks like they're trying to use their historic ties to the incoming U.S. administration to essentially claw their way back into geopolitical relevance.
Yes, reorienting themselves toward a broader Islamic leadership role.
Exactly. Just last week, Islamabad hosted the foreign ministers of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt.
Which is a very calculated survival mechanism. But, the Arab states themselves are also stepping up in ways we haven't seen in decades. Kuwait, for instance, has openly criticized the Arab League for being paralyzed and ineffective in the face of these fast-moving crises.
Wow.
But the truly remarkable development, the one you really need to pay attention to, is the operational cooperation emerging between Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Qatar.
I really need to pause on that because it wasn't that long ago that Riyadh imposed a crippling economic blockade on Qatar.
Right, they absolutely hated each other.
Right. And now these former regional enemies are teaming up, completely sidestepping massive historical grievances just to manage the immediate fallout.
Yep, needs must, as they say.
And meanwhile, the U.S. role seems to be evaporating, or at least falling severely short of what these countries expect. I read the new U.S. administration is even floating the idea of asking these Gulf partners to finance the conflict themselves.
Which is a huge shift.
It is. It really makes you ask, is an entirely new Iran-free security system even possible in the Middle East, especially with Israel showing unfettered air dominance?
Well, that right there is the defining question for the next decade of foreign policy. The Gulf states have clearly realized they can no longer bank exclusively on the United States for a security umbrella.
They're on their own.
Essentially, yeah. They are being forced into extreme operational agility. Moving forward, the sources suggest they will start hedging their security demands by looking toward Asian countries, specifically countries like India, who are the primary buyers of their oil and gas.
So the whole post-World War II setup is just done.
Basically, the entire architecture of West Asia is fundamentally fracturing and reforming.
Well, let's follow that thread back home. If India is going to be a major player in this newly reshaped world, we have to look at our own internal development.
Yeah.
Specifically, our human capital and our youth.
Which brings us to our third article.
Right. From the opinion section, digging into the explosion of higher education.
And the raw numbers from the State of Working India 2026 report are just staggering. The physical expansion of the higher education system has been nothing short of a revolution. I mean, in 1950, India had roughly 1,600 colleges.
Okay.
By 2022, that number exploded to over 69,000.
69,000. That is insane. And the seats are actually filling up, too. The gross enrollment ratio, which basically tracks 18 to 23-year-olds in higher education, it jumped from 16% in 2011 to 28% in 2022.
That's a huge leap.
It is. But here's the truly optimistic data point for me. There's been an incredible convergence across genders and historically marginalized social groups. Scheduled caste enrollment more than doubled, from 11% to 26%, and scheduled tribe enrollment jumped from 8% to 21%.
And those are monumental strides in basic access, truly. However, the data also reveals a deeply concerning negative trend.
There's always a catch.
Right. Capacity simply hasn't kept up with this enrollment boom. The student-teacher ratio is steadily deteriorating. Back in 2010, you had about 24 students per teacher. By 2021, that climbed to 32 students per teacher.
Man, it sounds like we built a massive multi-story restaurant to seat everyone who was previously locked out, but we just forgot to hire enough chefs for the kitchen.
That is a perfect analogy.
Like, you can get a table now, but the quality of the meal is going to suffer drastically.
But beyond just crowded lecture halls, the article dives into a financial barrier that feels even more insidious.
Right. It explores what we call the equity gap. Expansion of basic access just isn't enough if the most lucrative professional degrees remain walled off by exorbitant costs. The report highlights that an engineering degree now costs around 72,600 rupees annually.
Wow.
And a medical degree hovers around 97,400 rupees. Wait. If you look at the rural and urban poor, their total annual per capita consumption expenditure, meaning literally everything they spend on food, clothes, and housing combined for a whole year, is often less than those tuition fees.
Exactly.
So we aren't just failing to provide chefs for the restaurant, we are actively pricing the poorest diners out of the most nutritious meals. They're being financially forced into cheaper humanities and commerce streams, while the wealthiest households completely dominate the professional courses that lead to the high-paying careers.
Which means the higher education system risks reinforcing existing economic inequalities instead of breaking them down. For you, the listener, the real takeaway here is that true economic opportunity requires moving beyond just building more physical colleges. We have to invest aggressively in faculty capacity and bridge this devastating financial gap, or our whole demographic dividend will remain largely unrealized.
So true. Now, we've been talking about the formal education of young adult, but let's dial it back a bit. Let's look at the informal home environment of early childhood.
Oh, this one is heavy.
Yeah. Our fourth article from the science section explores how young minds are being fundamentally rewired before they ever reach a college campus. We're talking about screen time.
And pediatricians and psychologists are raising alarms that we just can no longer ignore. Dr. Melissa Greenberg, a clinical psychologist featured in the piece, points out that human vision is incredibly neurologically dominant.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, when a toddler looks at a screen, they are so intensely visually stimulated that their brain essentially tunes out all other multisensory real-world interactions.
It just hijacks their attention completely.
Exactly.
But, the American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines are incredibly strict on this. They recommend virtually zero screen time for children under 2, with the exception of maybe a brief video call with a relative. But then you look at older kids, and the contrast is absolutely jarring. Recent data shows teenagers are now spending an average of 8.5 hours a day on screen-based entertainment.
8.5 hours. It's wild. And we are starting to see the long-term data on what that exposure actually does. Dr. Tara Tyagarajan from Sapien Labs led this fascinating research, linking the exact age a child receives their first smartphone to their mental health as an adult.
I read about this. The findings are pretty grim, right?
Extremely grim. The younger a child gets a phone, especially if it's under the age of 13, the higher the likelihood of them experiencing severe issues in adulthood. We're talking hallucinations, aggression, and a profound detachment from reality.
Detachment from reality. That phrasing is terrifying. And we are already seeing extreme, tragic manifestations of this digital dependency. The article highlights a heartbreaking case in Ghaziabad where 3 minor sisters aged 12 to 16 tragically took their own lives after their parents restricted their phone use.
It's just devastating.
It really is. They left a note explaining that being banned from their online shows made them feel unbearably lonely. We also have Michael Notel's massive meta-analysis tracking nearly 3 lakh children, which confirmed a vicious cycle. High screen time causes anxiety, and then those anxious kids turn back to screens to cope with the anxiety.
A literal feedback loop.
Yeah, but let me push back a bit here, just playing devil's advocate. As a parent, sometimes handing over an iPad is the absolute only way you survive a chaotic grocery run or a long flight. Are we really saying the glowing pixels themselves are melting kids' brains?
Well, no, the pixels aren't radioactive. The real danger lies in the opportunity cost. The human brain is plastic. It wires itself based on experience. If a child is staring at a tablet in a restaurant, they aren't scanning the room. They aren't trying to engage in awkward conversation.
Right, they're just zoned out.
Exactly. They aren't learning to read microexpressions or nonverbal cues. If someone is tapping their foot in nervousness or shifting their body language in frustration, a screen-absorbed child completely misses it. They are failing to learn vital, nuanced social skills and conflict resolution tactics.
That makes a lot of sense.
And Dr. Greenberg adds one final, crucial point. Children are constantly observing. If parents are constantly hunched over their own devices, that becomes the baseline behavioral standard the child will adopt.
Man, that is a sobering thought, that our kids are basically inheriting our worst coping mechanisms.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, since we are on the topic of the physical environment of the household and the complex systems kids will inherit, let's look at how we literally power those homes. Article 5, from the text and context section, details India's massive chaotic transition from LPG cylinders to piped natural gas, or PNG.
Right. And to give you a sense of scale here, India currently has about 33 crore LPG connections. But the government has set a highly ambitious target to reach 12 crore piped natural gas connections by 2034.
Okay, before we go any further, let's clarify the alphabet soup for the listener because it gets really confusing.
Good idea.
So LPG is liquefied petroleum gas. That's the classic heavy metal cylinder delivered by a truck or a tricycle straight to your kitchen. Then you have LNG, which is liquefied natural gas. That is natural gas that has been supercooled to minus 160 degrees Celsius.
Which is just incredible technology.
The physics of that are amazing. It shrinks the gas down 1,000 times so it can be packed into massive ships and transported across the ocean. And finally, PNG is piped natural gas, which is that same gas regasified and delivered directly to your stove through an underground municipal pipe.
That is a perfect summary. And, the entire push for this massive infrastructure transition is deeply tied to the geopolitics we discussed back in Article 2. India imports roughly 60% of its LPG, and we rely heavily on Saudi Arabia and Qatar.
Right.
The critical glaring vulnerability is that 90% of that imported LPG passes straight through the Strait of Hormuz.
Which, as we established earlier, is currently closed off due to the West Asia conflict.
So transitioning to PNG is essentially like a country deciding to upgrade from buying expensive bottled water every single week to finally installing municipal plumbing for every citizen. But here's my pushback. If we already have this massive, highly functional network of trucks delivering cylinders to every remote corner of the country, why mandate this massive infrastructure headache right now? The article notes that 6 million households are being required to surrender their LPG cylinders and transition to PNG within 3 months. Why force it so aggressively?
Because the geopolitical reality leaves no choice. That choke point at Hormuz isn't just an economic issue anymore, it is a massive national security vulnerability. Switching domestic consumption from LPG to PNG allows India to source its LNG from a much wider, diversified pool of global suppliers.
So we aren't just completely beholden to Middle Eastern choke points.
Precisely. However, you are absolutely right about the infrastructure headache. The GAL pipeline network, as it exists today, heavily favors industrial zones because that's where the immediate profit is. It is highly concentrated in western and northern India.
Okay, so who's getting left out?
That leaves massive swaths of central, southern, and northeastern India completely undercovered. Building that last-mile underground pipe connectivity to individual household kitchens in densely packed cities, well, it's going to be an unprecedented logistical nightmare.
It's just fascinating how a war thousands of miles away dictates whether a truck or a pipe delivers the fuel to cook your dinner.
It's all connected.
It really is. Okay, moving from fortifying our home's energy infrastructure, let's look at fortifying our body's immune defenses. Our final article discusses a major medical breakthrough in India's fight against an endemic threat, dengue fever.
And this is huge news. For decades, our only line of defense against dengue has been vector control, which is essentially a fancy term for trying to kill the mosquitoes that carry the virus or preventing them from breeding in stagnant water.
Right, the fogging trucks and emptying out flower pots.
Exactly. But finally, we have a vaccine. Takeda's TK003, commercially known as Dengue, has just been cleared by the Drugs Controller General of India for use in people aged 4 to 60.
And a massive logistical advantage of this specific vaccine is that it does not require pre-vaccination screening.
Oh, that's critical.
Yeah, with older generations of dengue vaccines, you actually had to take a blood test to prove you had already been infected with dengue once before you could safely get the shot. Doing that for a population of over 1 billion people was basically impossible.
It was a complete non-starter for public health. But while Dengue solves that problem, it comes with a significant biological limitation that listeners really need to understand.
Okay, lay it out.
Dengue isn't just a single virus. It has 4 distinct serotypes, numbered DNV1 through DNV4. TAC003 was engineered using a DNV2 backbone. That means it is highly, highly effective at neutralizing the DNV2 strain. However, its efficacy drops significantly when confronted with DNV3 and DNV4.
Which is a major problem because the text and context piece points out that DNV3 is actually surging right now in North and West India.
Yep.
It's currently accounting for 20 to 30% of all severe cases.
Except.
Plus, there is a massive cost barrier to consider. The 2-dose course is expected to cost anywhere between 6,000 and 12,000 rupees. For the vast majority of the country, that makes it strictly a private sector luxury for now. There is an indigenous Indian candidate called Dengue currently in phase 3 trials that might be cheaper and available by 2027. But for now, Dengue is the tool we have. But wait, let me get this straight.
Sure.
If the vaccine is built on a DNV2 backbone, and it's weak against DNV3, which is actively circulating right now, does that mean if I pay 12,000 rupees and get this vaccine, I could still get dengue?
You absolutely could. And this is vital to understand from a public health perspective. TANGE003 is what we call a disease modifier. It is not a transmission blocker. Think of it like a seatbelt in a car. It won't stop the DNV3 car crash from happening, but it is highly effective at keeping you from going through the windshield. It protects brilliantly against severe disease, hospitalization, and death.
Okay, that's still a big deal.
It's massive. For an Indian healthcare system that regularly collapses under the weight of patients during the monsoon dengue season, keeping people out of the ICU is a structural victory. But it also means those traditional vector control methods, eliminating standing water in your neighborhood, using mosquito nets, sprayings, they remain completely indispensable. The vaccine is a crucial new layer of armor, but you still have to fight the mosquitoes.
That makes perfect sense. It's about mitigating the catastrophe, not building an invisible force field.
Precisely. And as we wrap up this deep dive into today's sources, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought that connects all the seemingly disparate threads we've explored today.
Let's hear it.
We started by discussing the fragility of public trust in institutions, and we moved through shifting global wars, the soaring costs of educating our youth, and the physical rewiring of children's brains by screens. If we are raising a generation of children mediated primarily by glowing rectangles, completely detached from real-world face-to-face conflict resolution, how will they possess the nuanced social and intellectual tools required to navigate the intensely complex geopolitical and infrastructural challenges like securing energy pipelines across hostile borders or managing complex global health outbreaks that we've unpacked today?
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.